Okay, so I have to admit, I have been waiting for a comment like this for a while, because if you can't tell, I'm a big old nerd. So let me read this one out for you, okay? I think it's fairly poor form to compare the New Zealand right to space Nazis as quite poor form. Also, NZ right parties are trying to remove race-based policy and legislation which are inherently racist, as it benefits one specific group because they were born into it, when the same policy could target a socio-economic status instead. So it's funny to suggest the right is more like space Nazis when the left pushed race-based policy. And I mean, maybe if the government was doing something to create equitable outcomes based on socio-economic values, that could be a valid argument, but they're clearly not doing that. This is actually a typical reductive statement from a fan of the coalition who thinks that working towards the promised equitable outcomes for all treaty partners and putting in place treaty-enshrined prerogatives and protections is separatist racism, while also completely misunderstanding space Nazis. So, space Nazi is actually a really well-worn trope. The imagery of the historical regime from the 40s creates shortcuts for us to recognize as audiences that mean that we read them as bad guys, no matter the context. And there's different types of space Nazi. There's the biological purist determined to exterminate everything different, to the strength through discipline messaging with gold trim uniforms, through to the power of banality of evil and younger fascists, through to the service guarantees citizenship polish of a well-organized machine. There's always a rhetoric of purity, an aesthetic of order, and an industrialized logic that says treating the environment and people as raw materials is for the greater good. And if those three elements sound familiar, well, there's actually a really good reason. Take the way that the Empire is managed in the Star Wars universe. You have the public face of acceptability that seems somewhat awkward, if publicly resistant to the power that they wield. You've got the schemer who is happy to be manipulating people to go against their own will despite what the public see, and you've got the old conservative who promised to return to the glory days before the chaos of the Republic's inclusivity. Here we've got three people that fill the role of one Emperor Palpatine. And you've heard talk of the average Kiwi, the squeezed middle. These are direct rhetoric of purity descriptors that creates an othering of people. By framing initiatives like the Māori Health Authority as separatism, the coalition positions a singular Eurocentric standard as the pure or default for everyone. Look at the move-on orders that the coalition announced, where they remove homeless people from streets because they look disorderly. It might upset people on imaginary cruise ships. This feeds into that aesthetics of order. It looks tidy, and that's the important thing. It's the very imperial peace that we keep hearing imperial agents talk about.
And here you were, all that time, hiding in the shelter of imperial peace and quiet.
And that industrialized logic, how it's the fast-track approval plan that we've got, where the concerns and needs of the public, iwi, the environment, they're all ignored because Shane Jones likes to scream, dig, baby, dig, and make claims that this is the only way to unlock economic prosperity for the country. The plan to import LNG or to go back to oil and gas extraction where no one found resources for decades, that reads like the prelude to the Gorman Plaza massacre. Hearing political leaders talk about out-of-touch elites within our education system or environmental agencies, or ignoring data and evidence that shows their plans are going to harm young people, that's direct parallel to Palpatine's anti-Jedi rhetoric. And the idea of locking kids up in boot camps to correct their behaviors, that's literally what they did to the Junior Academy on the Bad Batch, to reprogram young people to standard, state-sanctioned indoctrination. The major culling of the public sector, over 10,000 jobs gone. Well, that's Order 66 being executed.
Execute Order 66.
The Empire claims that they need to ensure peace and security by limiting movement and expression, like gang patches and disenfranchising voters that the coalition did. The Empire tried to wipe out local identity to focus on imperial identity, like the current government's education reforms that remove local context to focus on topics like teaching Beowulf and stopping new entrants from hearing kupu Māori in class, or the current government's removal of te reo Māori names and signage. The fact is, there's a ton of parallels just within the Star Wars space Nazis with the current government, from 90-day trials taken to the extreme in the prison complex on Narkina 5 being a sign that as far as those in charge are concerned, efficiency of the machine, or businesses, should override individuals' security. Or the reinstatement of the Three Strikes Law and the removal of free cultural reporting in courts is almost identical to the Public Order Presenting Act mentioned in Andor because it suppresses unrest without looking at root causes and dealing with them. The way the coalition used the cost of living crisis to be elected in 2023 is similar to how Palpatine used the Naboo incident to rise to power in the Senate. The way Winston argues for his war on woke, it runs parallel to the way the Empire's messaging in Andor that distraction and division threaten stability. Mainstream media that licks the boot to the government no matter how bad they are at their job, while cutting funding to media that holds them accountable after threatening to do so live on air, well, that's part of how the Empire took control of communications and messaging. Clearly the government aren't actually space fascists. It's not like our government gives money and support to a rocket company working with the US military or anything. But there are a lot of parallels between the actions of the coalition and the fictional space Nazis that we see in popular culture. And we see these things happen in pop culture because they should be easy for us to recognize as a shortcut for the producer of bad things, because of horrible beliefs that hurt people, communities, and those who rely on others in some other way to be themselves. In fact, there's examples all through the world where pop culture has helped people identify good causes to fight for. Before rebranding as Fandom Ford, it turned out that the writer of Harry Potter was a terrible person, so they had to rebrand. There was the Harry Potter Alliance, who called themselves Dumbledore's Army, who fought for equality and human rights. Gen Z activists used the three-finger Hunger Games salute and One Piece flags to represent resistance to corrupt governments. There's research that shows by moving a political conflict to a galaxy far, far away, it makes it easier for us to recognize in current situations because it lowers our defensive barriers caused by our own political bias. And pop culture creates a mythos that inoculates people to recognize authoritarian rhetoric, according to sociologists. The fan brain will better recognize the patterns of the dark side than someone who hasn't seen what was originally a story about the Viet Cong fighting the US Army and winning. All of this is a skill known as lateral reading, where you look beyond what's just presented to find out what it means, and there's a heap of research out there that shows that when this skill is taught in schools, it helps people think critically more as an adult and recognize those patterns of authoritarianism better. So no, our government isn't actually space Nazis in disguise, but the parallels run strong in a lot of areas. And in some countries, those parallels are even closer. And we, as a country, in the way that we've taught people for years, haven't really given the wider public a lot of tools often needed to see those parallels because we're so close to them. But next time you sit down and watch Star Wars or Star Trek, Doctor Who, Starship Troopers, Stargate, pretty much anything in the world of pop culture, look for those parallels and train yourself on finding them, so you can better recognize them when they're presented to you by a man in a suit in Wellington. Oh, hi there, podcast listeners. Thanks for checking out today's podcast, whether that's on video or audio. I really appreciate it. And I did finally get around to doing a podcast end tag, which I've been meaning to do for a while instead of just taking you onto the Facebook version. So while you're here, why not hit that subscribe button so that you can get updates coming in directly every time there's a new episode uploaded. Just seems like a really simple way to keep up to date with all of the crazy that's going on. So, yeah, give that a shot, and I'll talk to you soon.